what is the Will of D? Occasionally in the One Piece world, you'll come across characters with this ever so mysterious initial D, such as series protagonist Monkey D. Luffy. And as at least 93.4% of my audience will understand, at first you don't think anything of the D, but there comes a special time in life when that D grows on you and it starts to consume your every thought. That is One Piece fans, because the D is the key to everything. It doesn't stand for something mundane like Dennis or Dwayne, nor does it stand for something as grand as recent theories such as Descendant Dream or Dawn. The Will of D, for as much as it has radically shaped events over the past millennia, holds a bizarrely simple meaning, likely conjured by an ancient group of people to prove their friendship to one another, in a very similar maneuver to a modern group of friends who did the exact same thing but picked a letter much further down the alphabet. This is the meaning of the Will of D. And before we continue, I need to shout out Dak Sake, who inspired the foundation of this video with his personal examination of the D. He loves the D. And there will be a link to his video in the description. But here are 3 things you need to know immediately to solve this mystery. 1. The D is not exclusive to a species, race, or any single civilization. While we've seen mostly humans bear the initial D, there's also a clan of giants with the D, indicating that this letter can be borne by anyone. Secondly, there is no exclusive ideology within D carriers. Those with the middle initial D generally make up the greatest heroes of the world, but they can also be the greatest villains, like Marshall D. Teach and Rox D. Zebek. The only thing that these D swingers have in common when it comes to this is that they either end up becoming great heroes of the world or great villains. And thirdly, former world noble Don Quixote Rocinante referred to those who possess the middle initial D as the enemies of the gods. Although I want to note that in literal Japanese, Rocinante says it much stronger than that. He refers to them as Kami no Tentaki, meaning the natural enemy of God, which is a position that Oda has been consistently putting Luffy in over the course of One Piece, such as his rubber powers being the natural counter to God Enel's lightning, or being the only person willing to punch St. Charlos and defeating Doflamingo, the latter 2 of whom are world nobles who claim to be gods. So no one in this world is more of an enemy to anyone who uses the title of God than Luffy, which is appropriate because Luffy himself possesses the devil fruit abilities of an alleged god, the Sun God. And question, when was the first time that Luffy was referenced as the Sun God? That's right, Alabasta, but you probably don't remember, which is why you also don't remember what the Will of D is, which was revealed in that very arc as well. Let me be perfectly clear. Alabasta is a very important arc. This cannot be understated, so what we're going to do is we're going to put that sentence in bold on the screen for proper emphasis. So one thing you'll often hear about One Piece is that Oda only planned it to run for 5 years, and this was true at the beginning. Oda abandoned that plan either during or after the East Blue Saga because he was having too much fun drawing. However, he still intended to conclude the series in a reasonable amount of time, which means that all of early One Piece should be examined with an unhealthy level of scrutiny, because these early arcs were intended to contain everything Oda needed to set up the ending of the story whenever that came about, which is why now in very late stage One Piece, we're seeing all of these classic elements come to prominence again, like the Elbaf giants appearing on Egghead and the renewed relevance of Nefertari Vivi, who at this very moment may be the most important character in the entire series, at least from the perspective of Emu. We might not be capable of registering everything at the time because we don't have the plan, but I think that everything you need to solve almost every major mystery in One Piece was given to us in those earlier arcs, specifically by the end of Skypiea, including the Will of D. So let me give you a mind-blowing example of the sort of thing I mean. I was informed of this little detail from a video by Sawyer7Mage, so shout out to him, but when Robin and Cobra enter the Tomb of Alabasta, the first thing we're greeted with is this grand depiction of a sun being guarded on either side by a jackal and a falcon. The sun in this case represents Alabasta. Their national flag is a sun symbol. It is the country of the sun. And the jackal and falcon are the traditional guardian deities of the nation, in the modern day represented by Pell and Chaka. But this isn't just a throwaway piece of flavor. Oda chose this room to stage Luffy and Crocodile's fight for a very specific reason, and he very often features this monument in some very prominent panels. For example, in the iconic moment when Luffy claims that he'll be the Pirate King, Luffy is placed directly in the middle of this monument, occupying the space of the sun, which is one of the earliest references to Luffy having the powers of the sun god Nika. It's also very nice because the sun was the symbol of Alabasta. So this is Luffy standing up to represent represent the country's struggle against crocodile. But there's a lot that goes into the planning of these panels that 99.9% of people, in this case including myself originally, never notice. And then in the next big arcscape here, the sun god name is dropped for the first time as an integral aspect of a society directly connected to the ancient kingdom, as well as Oda depicting Luffy in the now classic Nika silhouette for the first time. Also, as a side note, it's a personal theory of mine that Pluton was originally supposed to be hidden under Alabasta, and that's why the Nefertari family refused to move to Marijois, because they needed to stay to ensure its protection. But as time went on, the idea of Wano was developed, and that element got taken and Pluton got plonked onto the island to give Wano some extra oomph instead. But all of the major elements, all of the big picture mysteries is stuff that Oda had planned out well in advance. And not being able to predict that One Piece would go on for almost 3 decades, he sneakily dumped a lot of the answers to our questions in early arcs. Which brings us to the Will of D. During Alabasta, after encountering Bon Clay, an enemy that could morph into, and in Nami's case, expose their bodies, Vivi and the Straw Hats drew the letter X on their arms to prove that they were trustworthy and actually them. And what was initially a very practical symbol then evolved into something much bigger than any of the crew could have anticipated at the time. The main use of the X was to signal to Vivi without the world government knowing that they were affiliated. Because if they'd shouted and done something traditional like verbally say goodbye, then Vivi was going to get into a lot of trouble for cavorting with those nasty pirates. So instead, they used the X to deliver a secret message. One stating that even though Vivi chose to remain on Alabasta, that X is the eternal proof that Vivi is a friend of the Straw Hats and in fact a crew member. And so our proposal from here is that the Will of D was a very similar idea. 800 years ago, a certain pirate crew came up with a simple and heartwarming way to communicate a message that went on to shape generations as this middle initial was passed down through the ages. At the time of this recording, the oldest known D wielder that we know of is Nefertari Lily, who just so happens to be the ancestor of Nefertari Vivi, who was the reason why the Straw Hats created the X symbol in the first place. And along the same lines, Lily was potentially the reason why the D symbol was created. She and the Alabasta Nation were one of the 20 founding kingdoms of the world government, and they were all publicly at war with the ancient kingdom. However, it could be the case that to signal to Joy Boy that she was on his side, Lily signed any correspondence with the name Nefertari D. Lily, something so innocuous that no one would bother to question it if they saw it, but something that, if understood, firmly proved where Lily's allegiances lay. And it worked because to this day, Imu wasn't sure about exactly what happened with Lily, although Imu himself does assert that he knows what the D means. The D is the name of those who once opposed us. Those who bubble up from every corner of the world bearing the D are nothing but empty husks, ignorant of the meaning of their name. However, this recent development has its roots in Queen Lily's great mistake of 800 years ago, as does the curiosity of the scholars rummaging after the Void Century, as does the spate of pirates seeking the poneglyphs for treasure. If not for Lily's mistake on that fateful day, the loathsome relics called the poneglyphs would not have been scattered across the world. And this unfortunate event of the past has one disastrous potential explanation. Was the liberation of the poneglyphs actually a simple mistake, or was it planned? Imu then asked Nefertari Cobra for the full name written on the ancient letter he found, to which Cobra replied, Nefertari D. Lily. And Imu doesn't like that. He does not like that at all, implying that Imu was unaware that Lily possessed the Will of D. And the way I read it is that D is proof that Lily betrayed what would become known as the world government, and this poneglyph business was not a mistake. They were scattered on purpose. Whereas if the letter was just signed as Nefertari Lily, no D, then this event of the past would have been an accident. But what this shows is that the D played its role to perfection. Imu may have learned its meaning, but the shroud it gave Lily took Imu 800 years to uncover. And that's very important because if Imu had known that Lily was D, then it's very unlikely that he would have allowed Alabasta to exist in its current state if he allowed it to exist at all. So it would seem like Imu gave Alabasta the benefit of the doubt, that Lily was not to blame. This was all a huge mistake. Lily couldn't have done something like that. So we'll let the Nefertaris off for now because they're ultimately loyal to the world government. But also, as stated previously, I would suspect that the initial D wasn't something held by the entirety of the ancient kingdom. But much like the X in modern One Piece, the D was exclusive to those of Joy Boy's crew. And what this could imply is that every person with the initial D today is descended from a former member of the world's first pirate crew. So in addition to Nefertari Lily, on Joy Boy's crew there could have been a monkey, a gull, a jaguar, a podcast, a Trafalgar, and however many other members there were. But then you ask the question, why a D? The X was chosen by the Straw Hats because it was a very stereotypical symbol of piracy. Crossbones X marks the spot Yar and me hearties and that sort of stuff. But that wouldn't necessarily have occurred to Joy Boy 800 years ago, as he was the world's very first pirate. There was no stereotypical set standard, and so the idea that I currently enjoy most is that the D represents a smile, the symbol of joy, and the very last thing that someone with the Will of D does right before they die. And it gets crazier because in the modern day, what you do is you put the D and the X together and you get the XD emoji, which is like crazy levels of joy. But when I was going through all of those names before, there were two D families that I missed, those being the Marshalls and the Roxes. So according to this idea, there may have been a Judas on Joy Boy's crew, which is why we do have some evil Ds in the world, or even Judas's plural, Judai, if you will. Because we have both the Marshalls and the Roxes being less than upstanding members of society. And St. J. Garcia Satin comments directly on Blackbeard's lineage during Egghead Island. Katarina Devon claims that Marshall D. Teach is special, and St. Satin replies, as is his bloodline, which is a comment that he and the other elders haven't made about any other D-clan members. Although theoretically, as long as you know the meaning, you could masquerade as a Will of D member. So there might not be a traitor so much as there is a fake. And Dax Sake took this a step further by proposing that the Will of D could refer to a very specific character, being Davy, as in Davy Jones, a pirate who Oda obviously references with the Davy Back fight. And the name itself could be a stupidly obvious explanation for how this tradition started. The Davy Back fight is all about poaching crew members, so it could have been a game engineered to get Davy back after he'd been taken by another crew or something. I'm not so sure how I feel about this one though. I think that if the D does stand for a name like Davy, then it would have to be a case where Joy Boy's real name was Davy, which could make sense because Joy Boy did create what we now know of as the One Piece, hiding a vast treasure in the world in the same sort of way that Davy Jones hoarded his treasure in his locker at the bottom of the sea, which could also track because after finding out about the flooding, there is a renewed idea that Laugh Tale is somewhere underwater, and specifically somewhere that you can only get to by following the deep current, which the closer it takes you to the ocean floor, the slower it carries you, and Brook claims that if you got caught in it, then you wouldn't see the light of day again for 2,000 years. So that's obviously a bit undesirable, but also it becomes one of the only reasonable places on this planet for Laugh Tale to be located. It's one of the last great remaining mysteries on this planet which no one can reach alive, at least not without the special secret that the Roger Pirates discovered. Now speaking of Roger, he was the keynote speaker for the Inherited Will conference. These things cannot be stopped. Inherited will, people's dreams, the ebb and flow of the ages. As long as people seek the answer to freedom, these will never cease to be. And at this point, it's important to note that Inherited Will is not exclusive to the Will of D. That's just the most prominent strain of Inherited Will we find in One Piece. But every Straw Hat has Inherited Will. Robin has the will of O'Hara, Chopper has the will of Dr. Hirolock, and Zoro has the will of Kuina. Plus, auxiliary characters also frequently display this inheritance as well, such as Carrot inheriting the will of Pedro, or Yamato desperately trying to claim the will of Kozuki Oden. And something that almost never gets mentioned is the very real concept of uninherited will, which was the title of chapter 625. This was the chapter where Queen Otohime protected St. Mosgard and begged the citizens of Fishman Island not to teach hate to their children. So One Piece isn't just about this fated force that runs non-consensually through generations. It's also about the decisions we make along the way to change or reinforce that will. In Otohime's case, she was able to change Mosgard's inherited will, a world noble of one of the 20 founding families. Her actions had the effect of uninheriting, if that is a verb, his inherited will, which to be fair, eventually resulted in Mosgard's execution, but not before he saved Princess Shirahoshi and changed the entire course of the planet as we know it. And that's what One Piece comes down to. A battle that started in ancient times, which Imu states has not ended to this very day. Because the combatants may have changed, but the struggle between the two prevailing strains of inherited will have not. And again, that sounds incredibly grand, yeah, fate of the world sort of stuff, but I do think it's infinitely simpler than that. For a will to be so powerful that it survived 8 centuries, we're not looking at a massive social, political, or geographical idea. All of those are fickle and crumble in the face of time. But what persists are core and simple ideas like friendship. And just as Luffy said on Alabasta when he and the crew marked themselves, no matter what happens from here on, our left arms will bear the sign of our fellowship. This is the sort of will that will endure no matter what. And so now I'm just patiently waiting for the day when we get a flashback panel of Joy Boy saying, no matter what happens from here on, our names will always bear the sign of our fellowship.